If you're unfamiliar with every aspect of the melee systems in Space Marine 2, you may have noticed that each weapon has their own characteristics. One such characteristic is known as the defense, but if you don't know what that means, then let me explain it for you. To keep melee weapons varied and performing differently, each of these weapons is allocated a different defense which coincides with the parry mechanic and subsequently the gun strike mechanic too. Let me break down the whole melee system for you so you know everything that you need to know. With melee weapons in Space Marine 2, you can parry every melee attack, which is a mechanic players who want to survive are going to need to learn to master, especially for surviving the higher difficulties. There are 3 types of melee attacks that enemies will try to attack you with. Generally speaking, you have their regular melee attacks, which will show no marker. Every enemy is capable of doing them, with the exceptions of being the zoanthropes and the neurothropes. These attacks have no cue, and you will need to visually look out for them if you want to avoid/defend against them. Then you have the blue ring attacks. These are heavier attacks which can be either single attacks or combination strikes. These attacks show a visual blue ring and are normally accompanied by an audio cue to let you know that an attack is coming. These are the attacks that you'll want to parry or block to avoid losing a significant chunk of health or to avoid being knocked down by. Then you have the red ring attacks. These attacks deal heavy damage and cannot be parried or blocked. Your only hope is to dodge out of the way with rapid movement. Now, if you want to be truly proficient at being a melee master, then you need to understand the key mechanic to defend against these attacks. This mechanic being parrying and the perfect parry windows. So melee attacks aren't instantaneous. There's a small window in which you have to counter the attacks and avoid taking damage. Each enemy has their own attack time and combination of attacks. Minoris enemy strikes to be parried easily, normally killing them in the process, so the perfect parry and gun strike mechanic doesn't really work here. Majoris enemies, however, can be parried and gun struck. But what constitutes a parry and a perfect parry? Take the example here. An enemy begins their melee attack. Here's when it starts, and here's when it hits you. But if you press the block button within this time frame of their attack, it parries them, knocking them back but not allowing for a gun strike. This is the parry. But if you press it within this time frame, the perfect timing, it knocks them back and allows you to hit them with a gun strike, dealing extra damage. Now that you know that, let's move on to the defenses of the weapons and their characteristics which will affect your combat style more than you realize, starting off with the balanced weapons. Now, as a general rule, balanced weapons feature high damage, moderate speed, and low cleaving potential. This comes with the standard parry window, which is the same window as the fencing weapons. With these weapons, you have the standard time frame to press the parry key, and from the time the enemy starts their attack to the time it strikes you, your window of space to hit the key to achieve a perfect parry is the standard, meaning you're more likely to have a good mix of parries and perfect parries. The response time of the parry is the same as the block weapon, and pressing a button will activate it in the standard time. The balanced weapon is the perfect in-between characteristic, the general rule, the standard issue if you will, and the generalist. Not specialized, but suited to classes and playstyles that prefer to engage a good mix of capability of dealing with Minoris and Majoris enemies. Now, the fencing characteristic generally features a high attack speed, moderate damage output, and low cleaving potential. This is because the fencing weapons are more suited to dealing with Majoris enemies like the Warriors and the Chaos Space Marines in single combat. Now, you can use them to attack hordes, but they're less significant against the larger groups of enemies. The perfect parry window represents this. With defense and defense, you have a larger window to perfect parry an attack which will lead to a gun strike. This is especially noticeable when playing with the combat knife. The response time for the parry weapon of this time is quick, so when you press the parry in the right time frame, the actual parry itself activates really quickly and sharply, and is easily the fastest of the 3 melee defenses. The fencing weapon is tailored to dealing with Majoris, Extremis, and Terminus enemies in single one-on-one combat. The enlarged perfect parry window and the parry response time allows you to decimate enemies quicker, and is by far my preferred melee defense mechanic and my go-to on all classes. The final defense is the block, arguably the worst defense mechanic of them all. So much so that in the FAQ forum, the developers have stated that they're going to be making changes to the block mechanic since it makes melee combat unbearable and is borderline useless as a defense. That being said, the block characteristic features high damage, moderate cleaving potential, and a slow speed. I'm sure it was intended to be the horde clearer of the weapons, but it's all down to personal playstyle. The block weapon doesn't really parry the enemy at all. Since the parry blocks their attack and can knock them back when executed properly, the block does exactly that. Stops their attack without any additional benefit. This is the trade-off for being a higher damage output weapon. Now, block weapons are suited to playstyles which deal with large amounts of enemies, with the high cleaving potential, allowing you to hit more enemies per swing than the others. It's the horde clearer of the 3 defenses and is not suited to being a one-on-one dueling weapon. No one ever uses the block. The parry and gun strike mechanics are far too valuable, especially in lethal difficulty. Now, you can equip perks depending on the class you are using. Some classes have a bias towards some weapons, if you will, like the Assault class. The Assault class has perks that boost the melee damage of the hammer and the strikes associated with the hammer, given it's one of the only classes that can use it. The Bulwark has the same perks and will associate with the Power Sword. once again, as it's the only class that has access to it. So if you're looking to make a more melee-centric class, then pay close attention to the perk system and maximize your effectiveness. Now, I'm not going to list every perk to help you make a melee-centric class, but this is just a general overview. Specific class perks and loadouts will be detailed in the ultimate class guides coming on my channel if you're looking for a specific build. The values of damage output, attack speed, and cleaving potential will vary from weapon to weapon, depending on the role it's intended for, but if you treat this as a baseline understanding of what they mean and a perfect parry mechanic, then it should all make sense. Now, I mentioned frequently minoris and majoris enemies in this video. If you don't know what I mean by that, then check out the other video explaining that as well. Hopefully my autistic brain has made this all make sense for you, hopefully equipping you with the knowledge to be a valuable asset to your brothers. And that brings us tidily to the end. If you have any questions, put them down below. I hope you found it useful. Leave a like, follow for more, and of course, thank you for watching. Bye bye.